Facebook Live?
Facebook, Instagram, and Twitch. Yes. I think Instagram. I know Facebook and Twitch, but yes, still on Facebook Live. And we get a lot of people who come back and watch after the fact. I think we average between like 40 and 100 to 120 views after the fact. Um, and I know people put them like on their personal websites, like some faculty members, and so that those tend to get more views. So yeah, we've had some get up to like the 2, 3, 400 like view mark, and I'm like, oh god, 400 people went back and watched it.
Rufus is watching as we speak,
Hi Rufus, hi Rachel, hi.
and he can hear us. So
Okay, he can hear good.
Yep.
As long as Rufus and Rachel can hear, I'm happy. Yeah.
Did you get my email that I wrote yesterday?
Yeah.
About just the
Yeah.
things that I.
Yep. Oh, it's not a shameless. It is a shameless plug because we are gonna plug it. I wish we had known because it looks like another one I'm gonna have to add to my list.
Well, I brought a copy. I can't. I wish I could give it to you, but I
No,
only
that's
have
okay.
two. But
I will.
Sam was like, Sam has to do. I was like, God, that's really similar to what I just wrote. And he goes, I know it's on my wife's desk right now. She's reading it.
Oh my god.
So she has it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one. I think I don't know if the representative from Indiana Humanities came to talk to you. They want to talk to you about this book and see if they can do some plug. They film you giving a little blurb about this book so that they can like post it on their social media.
Oh yes, somebody asked me about that.
Okay, I think after this they're gonna like film you.
Yes, that sounds vaguely familiar. What's that?
I don't know her name. She's new to me, at least I've never met her before. She's come back, right? Glasses, blonde, eating right. Waiting. Oh yeah, she'll come. Sorry, if you're watching this on the live stream, I don't care. We'll be fine. We're gonna have a good time. Hi. So I know I just mentioned to Wendy.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I would mention to Wendy that you wanted to talk to her about her book, and she brought a copy so that you can.
Great.
Do you want to film after maybe
After
like a little
fine,
diddly,
yeah. I don't want to.
diddly a blurb?
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna talk about it for sure.
Yes.
I'll
be
film your own
taking
thing.
Photos and filming little parts and stuff.
Yeah.
But yes, afterward, if you have time, love to get a little. Sure. I think we talked about it.
Yeah.
But it's good to meet you in person.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. So I'll just see
Awesome.
after here. So,
Okay. Yeah.
thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Like break. Actually, get my drink out before we start.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the speaker. So
Yeah. Can we get this on a double or get a double? Or can so Rufus said sound is good.
6:30.
Ooh, okay. This is my first time setting this up, so I was like, let's go live early and like have Rufus log on, right, and check like audio, make sure that they can hear us, and that I plugged everything in correctly. It sounds like I did. Yay.
yay.
Okay. Also, you too. Also, if your drink comes, you can just be like, hey, you can go grab it.
Or I'll tell. I'll just tell.
Yeah, time to bring it up. Drinks are important, both for staying hydrated and staying entertained. Volcano Moscatos. You know what? College was a time. I know. Hi for our live stream viewers. We'll get started in just a moment. Once we get drinks. And if you have not come in to Strangebird in the past, you should come in. You should come in. Food's good, drinks good, and we have a good time. It's just like a cool atmosphere. Even if you don't come for a book's booze, I will forgive you. But you should still come. It's a good time. I will talk louder. I know. I'm trying not to like get everyone's attention. But I will.
Are we mic'd or do we just talk?
No, we're just gonna talk in our auxiliary mics. We've been testing it, and it's. I know, like you can hear background noise, but it's actually pretty good.
But I mean, for them.
We're just gonna have to project. That's kind of the best we got right now. I'm sorry, the person who normally has the microphones is out this week, so they don't know where it is. They like literally cannot find them. So we're on our own. We're auxiliary today.
Okay.
But I think I have a lot of voice, so I can get a room. Okay.
Oh.
No, what's up?
Yeah, so you're a doctor, right? You have a
PhD. Yeah.
and an MD or
No, just a PhD.
in
Anatomy and cell biology.
Okay.
So, and I did reproductive immunology actually when I was in undergrad. So I'm like, it's funny because I came into this book and I was like, oh, I'm like educated. I know so much. And then I read this book and I said, oh, I know nothing. I don't know how my body, I don't know how anything works actually. And that's a little scary.
You know better than me.
No, actually fully don't. That's why I've been like so excited for you to come talk.
Are we
Yeah,
starting it?
Yeah, we can start in a minute or two. Oh, we're just having fun, y'all. Are we good? Is everything okay? Like I said, I'll talk a little louder. Yeah. Yeah, we'll start in just a second. Looks like family and friends are just rolling in, saying hi.
One more person.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Rufus and Rachel, you have had to watch this whole thing live. This is kind of like the experience, right? You're getting the at-home experience of when we do this, when we run this live. We're just spring break kicking, y'all. It's spring break. Spring break. To keep me on the rails. Yeah, just generally.
Got my
any-
drinks. So
Hell
I'm good.
yeah. Okay, we got the drinks, people. We got the drinks.
Is that your sweater? I don't want to
Yeah,
spill
you
on
can-
it.
You're good. Maybe that'll encourage me to wash it. I'm
If
kidding.
I spill it.
I promise I'm clean. All right, y'all. Hi. Hello. Welcome. Hi, sorry, we don't have our mics today, so we are going to project and speak loud. If at any point you can't hear me or Wendy, like flag us, let us know, and we will, raise the roof and we will speak louder. Thankfully, I was a drum major in high school, so I can shout. If I can shout at 150 teenagers on a football field, I can speak in a room. But so we're gonna, yeah. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And first off, you may notice that some of our team is absent. And I think in Women's History Month fashion, we have, I think, two new members of the Indiana Sciences family who were born recently, both from Sam and his wife, and Rufus and Rachel recently had their children. So they are out on family leave. And so I think I speak for everyone here that we are sending them our love and our well wishes and hoping for a speedy recovery and just a happy, healthy little family. It's so exciting. I'm so excited for you guys. And a full night's sleep. I hope you heard that. Full night's sleep. We are sending you full night's sleeps. And so thank you guys for all the guidance you gave me to help set this up. And thank you all for coming and joining us this Women's History Month special edition. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and just let Wendy introduce herself because you know yourself, even though we've already talked, and some of you may recognize her. I want you to go ahead and reintroduce yourself maybe to the group, your background, and a little bit just about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm here primarily because a long time ago, Sam, what's his role? Sam
has been with the he's like our Indiana Humanities partner.
And he's a former student of mine. I'm a professor at Purdue University, and I converted him to history.
Yeah,
just to history.
Thank you. We love having him.
He was a biology major, I think, and took one of my classes. And I said, Sam, I'm going to bring you over to the dark side, and it worked. And so years later, he contacted me, and I spoke with this group in 2023.
Yeah.
On a book on motherhood. So that's why I'm here. Were you there?
Yes.
Okay. And you're back. So it couldn't have been that. Okay, good. So I'm a Purdue professor, and my name's Wendy Klein, and I have a passion for all things related to women's health, women's reproductive health. I've written 4 books on various aspects of women's health. I'm not going to list them all, but the number 3 was about the history of midwifery and childbirth, called Coming Home. And then my most recent I brought, because it just is, it's very related to the book we're talking about, but it's exposed the hidden history of the pelvic exam. And so as I was reading It's Not Hysteria, all the, connections were firing, and excited to talk about that stuff. Let's see, anything else? I'm a violinist as well. I have some fellow musicians in the room. I play with the Lafayette Symphony, and I'm delighted to be here. So thank you. Can you hear me okay? Even back there? Thumbs up?
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and start with the history. I mean, that's where this book starts, right? Is the history of women's health, really the history of gynecologic medicine and research. And I was hoping you could maybe talk to us about if we see some like those roots, how have those impacted modern medicine and how modern gynecologic care is practiced? Because we learn in the beginning of this book, and likely we would learn in yours, about how really the roots of gynecologic medicine were not ethical in any way,
Right.
and were really horrific.
So do you have like 3 or 4 hours?
Yeah,
Or maybe
I mean,
30? No, I'm just laughing because it's an important question, and she does a great job of doing a very brief entrance into it. As a historian, it's hard not to get into the nuances and the context and the details. And then I teach, in fact, I skipped teaching today, my women in health class, to be here, but I have a great PhD student covering for me. But so there's so many ways in which it's connected. I guess for the purpose of our brief introduction, I'll say 2 things.
Okay.
The first is, before we go all the way back, what really struck me about this book is it reminded me so much of a kind of a modern day version of Our Bodies, Ourselves. Raise your hand if you've heard of the manual, Our Bodies, Ourselves. Okay. Great. So for those of you who haven't, it came out, the original one came out in 1971. And the whole idea was to, I'm stopping because I feel like I could go on a 20-minute thing here. And
I will enable. I'm an enabler, so I will enable you.
Well, I guess I would say we're in the middle of one of these cycles, and I think we're returning to 1971 in some ways, right? In terms of reproductive rights, and some other issues. But basically, back in 1969, a group of 12 women met each other at a conference, a women's liberation conference at Emmanuel College in Boston. That wasn't unusual to have a women's liberation conference in 1969. They were kind of popping up everywhere. But at this particular conference, there was a Sunday afternoon meeting, and that's where the 12 women met. And the topic was women and their bodies. And the purpose of the meeting was to come up with a list of reasonable OBGYNs in the Boston area. That's all they wanted to do. And they quickly realized they couldn't come up with a single person to put on the list. And so instead, as they started brainstorming and sharing horror stories of various things that they had gone through, in terms of not being treated well, not having access to information about their bodies, they decided to keep meeting. And the results eventually turned into the book, Our Bodies, Ourselves. They started doing their own research when they realized the problem is deeper than we don't know a good doctor. It's why don't we know information about our own bodies, and what can we do to gain access to it? And in turn, how can we make that information accessible to a wider audience? Because in 1969, you couldn't Google, you couldn't read about it, you couldn't pick up a magazine and read about this kind of stuff. It was all basically embedded in gynecology manuals that were intended for expert readers, right? People with MDs. And the message was, we deserve to have this information, and we're perfectly capable of understanding it because it's our own bodies. So that's my way of saying this is very much the next generation of that. Like, come on, let's make this information accessible.
Yeah.
and meaningful as well. So
Yeah.
that's my recent story. You want me to jump
Yeah.
backwards? Or do you
Let's
wanna-
jump. No, I want to jump back because we have we're in this post-Roe era, right? And one of the things that we are extremely cognizant of, I think, especially here in Indiana, where maternal mortality rates are not only so bad, but there's obviously a distinct racial component, right? Like Black women have extremely worse rates, higher mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, not only across the country, but specifically in the state of Indiana. And so when I'm hearing about, when I heard this opening chapter about the history and how enslaved women were really researched on and used as research subjects against their will, I ask myself, is this carried into modern practice and modern bias that we see in outcomes? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to do it in a bar and talk.
Yeah.
I mean the main issue that I think a lot of people are surprised when they learn about the kind of darker history of gynecology is the fact that the person that first learned about and tinkered with ideas about gynecology, partly in the interest of understanding women's bodies and leading to progress, was James Marion Sims, who was a Southern physician who basically practiced on the bodies of enslaved women who were suffering from a condition called vesicovaginal fistula. Vesicovaginal fistula. Really not something you want to talk about while you're eating. But it was a condition that was brought upon often from prolonged labor in childbirth that resulted in damage, right, and leakage in unpleasant ways. And Sims was interested in trying to figure out how to repair these fistulas. So, but sorry, one other thing. It's often caused by prolonged labor. It can also be caused by gynecological instruments used in labor, such as forceps, right? So the question is, what actually caused this? Often it was the tools developed by these doctors that ended up often doing more harm than good. Anyway, regardless, he worked on a number of enslaved women, 3 of which we know by the names Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha. And they were with Sims. He created a hospital, which was pretty much just a shack in his backyard, in which he
Great start.
operated on them for over 3 years. And some of them, Anarcha had more than 30 procedures done on her. No anesthesia. Anesthesia wasn't safe at that time period. So people debate to what extent was he not using anesthesia because they were Black. He was clearly believed, like many people of the time, and some people, unfortunately, still today, that Black women didn't experience pain the same way that white women did, and so therefore it was okay. Regardless, he didn't do this on white women. Okay, I think that's the important part of this story is that he didn't use anesthesia, but he also didn't. He only worked on enslaved women. And as I said, Anarcha had 30 procedures done on her. And the result was ultimately good for the field of gynecology, right? Because he did develop life-saving measures, but really at the cost of some of these women. And his interest and his justification for doing it so often was twofold. One, he said what they're suffering from is worse than death. And so therefore, it's okay to operate over and over and over again because, I'm really giving them a way out. But secondly, he as he convinced slave owners in the area, I'm gonna fix your property, right? And so I will restore them so that they can work for you again. So it was kind of part and parcel of the same thing. Anyway, I have gone through a lot of his materials and his records, and a couple of interesting things about him. I have 2 interesting quotes. One was when he first figured out how to deal with the vesicovaginal fistula issue. was to create a speculum. So he is also the inventor of the Sims speculum, which was one of the first gynecological tools.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first speculum, but it was the first heavily promoted one. And he does this. He has a white patient who falls off a horse and basically has organ prolapse, and he's trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And he takes a spoon and bends the handle. And he says, introducing the bent handle of the spoon, I saw everything as no man had seen before. So it was almost like the Lewis and Clark exploratory studies of the vagina. And he uses that to then develop the speculum. So he's known not only just for the procedure, but also for the speculum itself. The other thing that's interesting about Sims was he said, if there was anything I hated, it was investigating the organs of the pelvis, which seems like a weird thing for a gynecologist to say, right? Okay. And I asked my student, like, what do you think this means?
Yeah.
So I think it was intentional because he was a good friend of P.T. Barnum of circus fame, and he himself was kind of a master showman. And he goes to Europe to promote his procedure, and it suggests he's the best gynecologist in the world, and he travels around looking for people with fistula so he can prove what he's done. But he has to deal with the fact that this is the 1850s, okay, into the 1860s. Think about what a white middle class woman wears in that time period, right? She's fully clothed. If you see the classic picture I like to show from of gynecology in this time period is a fully dressed woman standing up like this, and the doctor with his hand up her skirt looking the other way, right? There's no eye contact, and he has no way of looking anywhere. Why is that? Because of Victorian morality. White women should not be seen, their body parts should not be seen. And so by saying this, if there's anything I hated, it was investigating the organs of the pelvis. It is, of course, saying, I am not a pervert. I don't like what I'm doing it. I'm just doing it because it needs to be done, right? And it helped convince people that it was okay to start using a speculum. A lot of doctors didn't like the idea of a speculum because they didn't think you should be looking, right? Instead, they believed in touch, that a really good gynecologist doesn't really need to peer in there. They would know by their fingers what the problem was. So he helped to resolve that debate and thereby ushered in the modern speculum, which sadly has changed very little in the last 200 years.
So I have recently learned, and I almost feel like I would say, wow, we've really come a long way in women's health research. Wow, haven't we learned so much? And I'm feeling the answer is no. And I mean, I was telling you before we started, I consider myself pretty well educated, especially on my own health, right? I have a PhD in anatomy and cell biology. Like, I did reproductive immunology research. I was like, oh yeah, I thought I was going to breeze through this book and I was going to be like, I've already heard of all of this. Fibroids being as common as they are, the different types of ovarian cysts and how common they are, endometriosis and how common this is and how many millions of women are impacted. And the conclusion of every one of these chapters is we don't really know much. And a lot of millions of people are affected by this, debilitatingly so in some cases. What have we learned?
Because there's no funding.
Well, and immensely less as
Right.
of late.
Yeah.
And so I want to take this I want to take this conversation to a turn and talk. And I want to ask you all if there maybe what reasons, whether societal or cultural, you think that may impact beyond funding, because we know funding is extremely lacking. But if you think there are maybe other factors that could explain why women's health research and is so limited and has not really advanced very far as it could have, considering how far we've come in other disease states. Why are things that affect millions of women just not even considered in the research space? So as a turn and talk, if you are new with us, maybe I'll give you a couple minutes to talk about this amongst yourselves, and then we'll come back and we'll share. We can talk. We can just share as a group. And if you don't want to share, that's okay. We can talk about what we talked about. And so I'll give you guys like 5 or 10 minutes or so, and then we'll come back. Awesome. And if you are with us on our live stream, we will stay with you. We will not abandon you. We just might talk a little softer, so if the audio gets a little wonky, let us know. So yeah, I mean, do you think there's a social or maybe like a cultural component as to why women's health is not researched as heavily? I mean, I try not to ask too leading of a question, but there's some that are so obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing that really struck me reading this book, because it resonates so much with what I say on every podcast I do, is the stigma, right? I have all kinds of examples. Lisa Brown getting silenced in the Michigan State Senate floor for using the term vagina in 2012 in an abortion case. And so
Oh my gosh.
she and her fellow congressmen go up the next day and stand in front of the steps of the state capitol and make. She's like, what term do you want me to use? Vagina is not appropriate. So this
Yeah.
discomfort with language, which then translates to so many of these women not knowing, understand their own anatomy.
Yeah.
If you don't understand it, you can't articulate it. And or you do understand it, but you're ashamed to talk, right? And so you don't.
Neither are good. Neither get you anywhere. Well, and you know, the author talks about it, and the book kind of gets into that. And they, after we get through the history, right, we go immediately into anatomy. Before we go any further, it's like let's make sure we are on the same page, and talking about this, because when you use cute words, or you're trying to not use the anatomic language. Oh, it's just your down there. It's your space. It's your private place. Okay, there's a lot going on down there. I need you to be specific, because then
Right.
you're 18 and going to a doctor for the first time,
Right.
and you don't know how to explain the pain you're having, right, and then you're not getting the care you need.
Yeah.
And how many women are suffering because they're not getting the care they
Yeah.
need, because they can't even articulate,
Right.
you know, where it's coming from.
But it's also disempowering. I mean, it's basically making it seem like that you shouldn't feel empowered by what's going on in there. You shouldn't really understand it. And if, you know, we're the experts. You don't need to worry about it, right?
It's just
And
wild.
well, and then she doesn't really talk about it, but it's the center of my book. Is that's what leads to the abuse. You know, that's what leads to the Larry Nassars and the minute these particular doctors do cross the line, women don't know what to do because they have not been taught to kind of articulate, or they assume that, well, it's a doctor, he must know what to do, or there must be a reason he's inserting a finger without a glove, right? Because he's a doctor, he wouldn't do anything appropriate. So it's disempowering, but that can lead to massive amounts of trauma.
God, I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I know we're going to talk about it. Like, right. I
No,
mean, that
let's
was,
talk about it. That's so important, and I'm glad you bring it up. And I think this is going to be required post book schools reading, because I need to read this book. Now I'm invested. Now I want to know. You're pulling me in. Come on.
well, it's the reason I wrote the book. I mean, I was working on a totally different project, and I got approached by an editor who read a previous book of mine where I have a chapter on a pelvic exam experiment, basically. And she said, would you consider writing a book about the whole history? And I was like, yes. Because that book came out in 2010, and so much had happened in the next 20 years, or whatever, it's
Yeah.
been 15. I was like, oh my God, it's so important to talk about this procedure and why it goes. Um, people are just silent about it. They don't know how to talk about it. They don't know to talk about it.
Oh yeah. And what do you think? What have you seen a role for things like social media, like TikTok, or like being able to spread? Because I mean, I have seen. I'm a millennial. I'm a little younger, and I've seen people even younger than me who they're talking about the speculum, the history of the speculum. They're talking about this is what to expect. Like you can go online and say this is somebody's talking about. Here's what you should expect in a pap smear.
Or
Here's
an
what
IUD insertion, right? And the
going
pain,
into that
all
line, crazy work. I wish I had those videos going into like that procedure and just like speaking on my own experience. And I was able to go. I was in a sorority in college at the time. Every person in my sorority in Greater Miami area heard me talk about Depo shot, the NuvaRing, the IUD, birth control pills, the different types of pills, different types of hormones, and we were in group chats talking about all of our experiences and who to go. Oh, the Planned Parenthood is down the clinic.
Right.
If you're, I mean, people were suffering with, especially different birth control hormone pills, and oh no, there are different options, and you can go down here, you can get that change. You don't have to keep doing this. Why are you hurting and not saying anything? Oh, it's been 6 months. Girl, get something else.
Yeah.
And just all of a sudden everybody going, oh yeah, me too. Oh, I've heard of that. And okay, now we're all educating ourselves. And I got the whole sorority block talking about.
That's great. It's like the Me Too movement of contraception. So
yeah, but we're seeing this online.
right.
And in bigger
That's what I mean.
communities.
Yeah.
I mean, it's honestly impressive. Just the scale of some of it and how educated, women are able to be.
Yeah.
We have misinformation and we have pseudoscience. We'll get into that in a bit.
Right, but I mean, it's really what the feminists in the early '70s were doing. They call it consciousness raising. But it's the same concept of sitting around a table and someone saying, I just had the most horrific experience with the doctor, or I just had an abortion, or whatever, and someone is going, "Oh my God, the same thing happened to me," and it's that kind of realization that, oh, this isn't just my problem or my issue. This is a societal issue, and once I realize that, it takes the stigma off of me, and the blame, like, oh, I've done something wrong or something. And it's more, well, if this is happening, why aren't we talking about it? Why aren't we doing something about it? And that turns into a social justice framework, right? As opposed to just for me or ouch or whatever. So there's something about sharing stories, whether you're sitting around a table or you're on TikTok or you're Zoom call, but of like that recognition of this unspoken thing.
Very share. Yeah, no. Yeah, I don't want to get too deep because then like it'll be 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh gosh. Okay, everyone. Hi. I don't know. Sorry, I don't have my microphone, so normally I'm like able to just like talk really loud.
We need, but that's good. It means people are.
That's true. That's good. That means that we have a lot. We have a lot of ideas, maybe. So I'd love to hear from any of you guys. What you guys came up with. If you think there are any maybe social or cultural reasons why women's health is not as heavily researched as I would argue almost anything else, but there are probably a lot of things that don't get enough attention in the research funding space. Obviously, I think our overwhelming conclusion was yes, but I'd love to know what you guys talked about. If you had any like specific examples or maybe ideas. Yeah.
One thing that I was kind of shocked by when she mentioned in the book was that in very recent history, the change that the FDA previously said that women of childbearing age could not be in any clinical studies.
Yeah.
So even if they had the funding and the opportunity and the motivation to further knowledge in this field, they didn't have the subjects to be able to do so.
So that's a great point that the FDA literally said if women were of reproductive age, it's too risky to do any experiments or do any testing. And like that's a lot of women that you're excluding from clinical trials. And so then now women are taking drugs that were only tested on men. And there's obviously a lot of differences that need to be considered, especially in a clinical trial that, I mean, what was it, 1990 or something?
96.
96? Yeah. That's really recent.
Yeah.
And the irony there is, I mean, part of it was in the interest of women, right? I mean, it's a slippery slope between
Yeah.
let's make sure we don't do damage that's unnecessary versus how do we know then if we are excluding everybody, regardless of whether they identify with someone who wants to have children. So by you automatically exclude someone of reproductive age, regardless of whether they actually are going to have children or want to have children, or if they've been sterilized or whatever. It goes way back to debates earlier about protective labor legislation, right, in the Supreme Court. Just to take it back further, when do we need to protect women because they're different? And that difference ultimately ends up stigmatizing them rather than the protecting them. So it's not a total black and white issue. I mean, there are reasons why it's done, but then we need to talk about the implications of once you enable that protection, what's the outcome? And if the outcome actually is harms more women, then we need to have a conversation about that. And it shouldn't take until 1996.
I think the thing too is that there are two concepts that are diametrically opposed. Childbirth is natural, it's a miracle, and it happens because we all got here.
Yeah.
But then women are excluded for studies because testing medicine on a menstrual cycle is too complicated and there's too many variables. So it's simple and natural and it's too complicated, but both are used as excuses not to pay attention.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. And we hear that a lot. Yeah, I feel like in the women's health space, it's all simple, it's all natural, and then also, yeah, you get well, it's too complicated, so let's not introduce another variable. And how can those coexist? I guess they kind of do, because it happens, right? Whether we want it to or not, it happens.
Well, I'm going to jump in. Sorry, I
No,
like to
don't
do that
ever
and
apologize.
say what's interesting is who plays a role in making it seem less natural? Obstetrics, right? So, because I'm sorry, I wrote a book on midwifery, right? So, the whole idea of the development of obstetrics and gynecology is you come up with tools, right? So, how do you justify a new field that is essential to save women's lives? Okay, obviously, before there was obstetrics and gynecology, there were midwives, and babies were born, right? Right. So then you have in the early to mid 19th century the establishment of gynecology as a professional, legitimate medical field. How do they differentiate themselves from midwives? A, they're male, but B, they use tools. And C, they start talking about how it's not natural at all. It's extremely complicated. And therefore they are necessary. And that's part of what promotes their profession. So they kind of have to do it. And I'm not saying they were all evil. Right, but that was a way of justifying it's actually a very dangerous procedure, and you need us there to give you drugs and tools and all these things. And so they actually contribute to that, turning it into something that's problematic and dangerous and mysterious, and you don't mess with it. Let us deal with it to a certain extent. So anyway, it's my admission.
Nope.
Other ideas, because I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Right.
It's such an important point, and one of the things I show an image of a photograph of these doctors in the 1970s, and it's a room full of white men, and I show it, and some of my students go, "Well, where are the women?" And I say, in 1970, 93% of all doctors were male and primarily white, right? They don't know this information, but once you realize that, of course, it makes sense that contributes to the idea of whose health matters and what to do about it. So yeah, very important.
Yeah.
Other We haven't heard from the back of the room. Sorry, I'm not.
No, it's the professor coming out. I feel it. My husband's a teacher,
Anybody
so I
from
know.
further back
Yeah.
want to say anything?
Are you all dittoing, co-signing? You're like, yes. Well, because I mean, and it is right. There's no women in the field of not no women, but it's a small minority of women in the field of medicine for so long, and especially in obstetrics gynecology. And so then the stats, I'm assuming, are probably better now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If anything, it's become the feminization of gynecology, which is good. But it also then, the minute something becomes predominantly female, it's taken less seriously, right? So yes, there's more there's female gynecologists than male.
Yeah.
And partly because consumers are kind of insisting they want a female gynecologist.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
So lots of interesting things are happening within
Yeah.
the field. And
Yeah.
there is this assumption that a female doctor is going to be inherently better than a male doctor, which is problematic too, right? Just because we share the same body parts doesn't make us more empathetic. Because the minute we do that, we're essentializing female qualities, right? But there is this kind of shared history and empathy often and understanding that gets lost if for centuries it's been an outsider, the expert that tells you, no, you don't really know. I know better than you what's going on in your body because I'm a doctor and you're not.
Yeah.
And for so long, that was a male person telling a female, look, trust me, I know I'm the authority on your body. You are not. And of course, that message is coming back to us right now. We don't have the rights of our own body. Therefore, we're not authorities on our body.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit and get into I want to get into this idea of holistic medicine. And that was something that I thought was kind of interesting about that book is that she talks about kind of like non-medical interventions, I guess, anything not. So she talks a little bit about supplements and how women may use alternative medicine or supplements. And I frequently that space is associated with, pseudoscience and misinformation. And it's kind of this weird space where it's like, oh, well, that's all hooey. But when you're suffering with something and you feel like you have no options, there are no pharmacologic interventions. There's no medicine you can take. There's no procedure you can have, or your doctor's not willing to give you. And so you are just ready to turn to anything. And maybe that's supplements, and maybe other women online, we're in this online space, right? You can Google whatever symptoms you think you're having, and someone is selling a pill or a drink or a powder or a program that you can sign up for that will cure all of your woes. Probably not real. But from your perspective, do you think that there's a reason because there's such little research on so many of these, gynecologic problems that women suffer with, do you think that that's why this is so prevalent in the women's space? This holistic medicine is kind of the only approach. Do you think that's interesting that this author who's very clinically,
right,
has a clinical background is offering this? She's saying, look, I have nothing better to offer you, so you might as well try acupuncture because what's the harm? Is that like common in this space? And do you think it's because there's no research? So you're kind of forced to do what you can with what you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more complicated than
for sure.
there isn't a simple answer to that. I think
Yeah.
absolutely that when anybody's struggling and they're told you have option A or option B and that's it, you're going to go try to figure out option C. I
Yeah.
think another piece of the puzzle you're alluding to, but is important, is insurance, right? So many of
Yeah.
endometriosis, right? Well, they're turning down whatever pelvic floor dysfunction. And this frustration that you go to one person, they tell you X, you go over here, they tell you Y. X and Y aren't communicating with each other.
Yeah.
Then you add insurance, they're not talking. It's horrible. I mean, we've all had bad experiences, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Go back to 1969, those women in that room, they're not the only ones. I'm sure many of us could sit around a table and vent for a long time about frustrating moments. So you're kind of forced to do some exploring, and it's easier now. We've got Google. We can find chats and forums and kind of reach out to people. So part of it is the limitations and the restrictions that are put on the options that we have that force us to become more creative. And there's nothing wrong with that. Also, there's a long history of alternative medicine. She may think sometimes, hey, be careful because those supplements have not been FDA approved. I get that. And she makes a really good point that this is not like a lot of using the word natural. We just talked about that, but natural is problematic. There's lots of natural things that are harmful. Right? There's natural poison out there, and there's a lot of procedures that kind of use natural things as well. So it's you got to be careful about that binary because it's problematic. But equally, there's a long history of alternative method of medicine, right? Acupuncture. There's huge studies that show it works. So I think being open-minded that there are other ways other than traditional Western medicine practices, but equally being skeptical that just because something is natural or you see it online or whatever doesn't mean it's not ultimately the solution. It's what's frustrating is we shouldn't have to work so hard, right? There should be more communication. That these X and Y should communicate, right, amongst each other, rather than you having to talk to X and then talk to Y and then go over here. It's ridiculous, and I think that's where it's a women's health issue because it's just not taken seriously. Here's a great example. I think she talks about this a little bit, but if you have, and I just learned this from the research I did in writing my book. So if you have any kind of vulvar pain, that's a dermatological issue. It's external, so you're supposed to see a dermatologist. Dermatologists are not trained to look at your vulva. You don't normally take off your underwear when you go to a dermatologist. Gynecologists are not trained to look at dermatological issues. So both of them are kind of skirting, no pun intended, the issue because they don't want to deal with it. And so I've gone to some conferences in which there's starting to be a networking about this, about, we need to educate, we need to have a conversation across boundaries between dermatology and gynecology to talk about this particular issue in which millions of women are suffering, and it's basically in an area that neither expertise really wants to deal with. And they send you to the other. They're like, oh, that's this. Go to a dermatologist. Dermatologist is like, oh, go to a gynecologist. I don't really want to deal with it. So it's that kind of thing as well. It's that infighting within medicine, not even infighting, but that professionalization, which has led to this kind of segmentation rather than that larger conversation, which is why holistic medicine is a good idea. Because at least with holistic medicine, you're talking about the whole body and trying to encourage these people to converse. But then you got to deal with the insurance that doesn't want to deal with that.
The world rotates on insurance.
Yeah.
It doesn't, without insurance nowadays, nothing works.
Yeah. Or you got to be independently wealthy, or,
Yeah. Which is why, like, when we were in our turn to talk, when I was in college, I turned to Planned Parenthood for all of my OB-GYN related problem. Anything I need, I had to go there because I'm a college kid. I'm not established at a clinic, but they're accessible and they're there and they have the resources. And so, this isn't like a Planned Parenthood ad or anything, but having, we're in a post-Roe era. I don't want to get on a soapbox here, and I know I'm preaching to the choir. It's hard to find care, even with insurance. Maybe you have the best insurance known to man. If you live 2 hours away, and even an hour and a half away from a doctor's office or an OB-GYN who can help you, are you going to get that care unless it's severe? Unless you're in a place where you feel like, oh, I'm just going to let it get worse.
Right.
So, how many of us have done that? I do all the time.
So can we talk about pain for a second? Because we're skirting the issue of pain, but obviously for a lot of these conditions, the suffering has to do with pain. And this gets us back to women's health because of the basic premise that women's pain is not taken as seriously as men's pain. And even we could talk about race because it's worse for women of color.
Yeah.
But if you just simply look at gender, women's pain is dismissed, especially reproductive, anything to do with down there.
Yeah.
It's either, well, you got to just deal with it because,
Yep.
you know, the curse, which she talks about, or it's, you're just, you know, have a glass of wine or, you know, take a pill.
Yeah.
But this lack of appreciation, I mean, the fact that it is just now in 2024, a conversation about whether IUD insertion or removal is worthy of any kind of anesthetic. That's ridiculous, right? If it had anything to do with the penis, there would be plenty of medication.
Yeah.
So we can talk about all these other things, but so much of this has to do with a complete misunderstanding or dismissal of pain, and that's a political issue. I mean, pain really is a political issue. Who gets to feel pain? And part of the issue here is that pain is subjective. I mean, you can say 1 to 10, but if I say 10, depending on the doctor, my 10 may be my male neighbor's 5, right? That it's not believed. So the subjectivity of pain makes it, they can't see it. It's completely my version of what I'm feeling. And so if I'm not respected by the person or believed, that's my problem. And that is really the issue for a lot of this stuff is subjectivity equals silencing, because if you are not in a position of power, you don't have a right to feel pain. And by complaining about it, you're either a wimp or you're a problem in some way. So if we talk about so many issues in this book, whether it's endometriosis or PCOS or childbirth or menstruation or dysmenorrhea, so many of these issues, this dismissal of pain as either something you just have to deal with or it's really not as bad as you think it is, and therefore we're not going to take it seriously and investigate because you're female is hugely problematic.
Well, and I know something.
And I'm still on my first drink.
Oh boy, are we requesting a second?
I'm just saying, this isn't even the alcohol. This is just the irritation about,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I didn't learn until I got to grad school. I had always been told that there were no nerve endings in the cervix. Well, it's okay. Things like IUD insertion, cervical biopsies. Well, you don't need any pain management because you can't feel anything there. I'm so what? I'm sorry. But I mean, I didn't learn that until I got to grad school, and I had an IUD placed before that. I felt the pain and fully believed. I said, I must be making this up because that's
Right.
what I've been told. And so I want to take this to another turn and talk, and we'll talk about. I want to ask you about if you learned anything in this book that maybe, like a piece of. I call them old wives' tales, things that are passed down, like in an oral tradition, I guess. Which I think there's a whole box to unpack in the old wives' tale. But I'm going to put that back in the closet, and we're just going to kick that to the side for now because I could talk about that for hours. But was there any misinformation about women's health that maybe you fully believed until you read this book and you said, "Oh, I thought that was true. Oh, I guess that's not true." Because in my opinion, and maybe you all will talk about this, it seems like that is very prevalent in the women's health space. There's just a lot out there that is just not true, but we fully believe it because what else am I supposed to go off of?
Right.
Nothing. So I want to give you guys like 5 to 10 minutes maybe and talk about misinformation and old wives' tales that were debunked, maybe in this book or maybe through an external source. And I'd love to hear your examples when we get back. Thank you. And for our live stream, we're getting another drink.
Yeah.
You go get another drink.
Well, or you want to go get me a drink?
Sure.
What'd you get?
The old fashioned.
Old fashioned.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's bringing one for him too. He'll be like it. Oh man, I can't imagine how crazy we're gonna get on 2 drinks. It's spring break.
I know, and I have my food sitting over there, but I haven't eaten it. No, I'm
Well,
fine.
No,
I'm fine.
we'll wrap up early. Because I don't want to keep you. I think our crowd is going to want to talk to you afterwards too, especially about your new book. So I won't keep you past. But yeah, the old wives' tales. Well, this is what I was told, and you don't have substantial like health education. I mean, we get some sex ed, but it's all based around don't get
Not
pregnant.
everybody gets sex
Well,
ed.
I've recently learned. I mean, I was educated in Florida, so I mean, I was given the hey, just don't get pregnant. That's like number one. The rest of it doesn't matter. Figure it out. Not my problem. But don't get pregnant. And then, you're kind of left to your own devices. And so if my mom tells me, or some trusted adult, oh, well, you don't have nerve endings. There, you can't feel pain on this. If you do, you're crazy.
Right. Yeah. I
You're
know.
hysterical.
Right.
Really.
It's all in your head. It's not real. And because pain is subjective, it's really true that people can kind of convince you. I remember, I mean, I had a very odd medical condition. As a violinist, when I was 15, I was playing like several hours a day, and I lost all the feeling in my hand. And eventually, it took almost a year to diagnose me. But I had something called cervical outlet syndrome. I had an extra rib in my neck.
Oh my god.
And it was preventing the blood flow when my hand was in this, getting to my finger.
Interesting.
And it was painful.
Yeah.
But nobody believed me because they couldn't see it. And so I went to all these doctors, and I had one doctor do an EKG and couldn't see because typically the pain is like the cause is like tendonitis and it's here, but it wasn't there. And so he's like, you need some counseling. There's probably something. I finally flew up to Boston and I saw this expert who was like, I think you have an extra rib in your neck. And it was like such a relief because there was a physiological reason for my pain. But I had spent months. I mean, that's probably partly why I got interested in this field, was that as a teenager, I just thought, well, if you have a problem, you go to a doctor and they solve it.
Yeah.
Not realizing that depending on what doctor you go to and their field of expertise, they'll tell you one thing, somebody else will tell you something else, and otherwise they'll dismiss you as it's all in your head. And there was such a relief, like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not crazy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But how many women never they don't have the rib in the neck to prove, and because if they hadn't found that, I still felt the pain. But I started questioning myself. Like, oh, it's probably not real.
Maybe I am overreacting.
Yeah. And pain is a weird thing because it can be really intense and then it goes away and then you say, oh, maybe whatever. So,
Yeah. Well, and we don't even still fully understand pain. So pretend like, oh, well, there's no way. No, I don't believe it. Brother, you don't understand pain. Like, what are you telling me? That my experience isn't real?
yeah, it's
Because
the
that happens.
subjectivity question.
Well, and it goes beyond even gynecologic care, right? I mean, like women who suffer from heart attacks are not believed, or strokes are sent home from the ER. Well, you're no way. That's not. It's not real. I mean, women die more frequently from heart attacks than men because they're not cared for in an appropriate amount of time. They're not believed, and it's not just gynecologic care. It's so everything about women. Your pain's not real. You're not believed. You're turned away, and your outcomes are worse. And the data's there. So I mean, if we're really saying that our medicine is data driven, you would believe women, but you don't. Yeah, and you had you're saying there was something physically there. How many women do have something physical like endometriosis or fibroids, and are still not believed enough to get the ultrasound, to confirm?
Yeah.
I'm gonna switch you out. That's okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
And you're so good. Yeah. Now we're getting crazy. Now we're getting spring break turn up. No. Yeah. Daiquiri of the day.
Yeah, it has Appleton 12. It's like a funkier daiquiri.
Oh yeah. Maybe we will get turn up. Okay. What happened to our nice table over here?
They all-
Maybe they might be coming back.
they were into it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I know I know. Yeah, we're into it today. You're just so engaging. I when they said they were like, we have to bring Wendy, I said, okay, say less. I said, say less. It's a banger. It's gonna be a banger. It's gonna be so much fun. Okay, so I think we're gonna come back. Hello. Hi. Sorry. I don't want to interrupt. Yeah. I don't want to interrupt because you guys were like talking, so I know it means that like
It's
you
my
probably
table. It's my people.
well
Hey,
they
people. My people.
because
Mhm.
we're getting Professor Wendy. We're getting Professor Klein, and I'm living for it. So I want to hear from you guys if you have any examples that were debunked. Maybe not by this book, maybe by this book, or if you've heard things that you're like now later in life you go, that was so not true. Like who told me that? Because I don't even know where I heard the cervix has no nerve endings. I don't even know where I heard that from, but I believed it until I was literally in histology. If you remember, our January guest, Jess Byram, was my histology professor, and she was the one who debunked that for me in grad school. Thank you, Dr. Byram, for debunking that for me. But I want to know what misinformation or what things, myths maybe, about women's health, about whatever, that were debunked maybe by this book, maybe not, maybe with age. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm from the South. I've always heard a lot of old wives' tales.
Oh, well, I'll start because I'll get the ball rolling. Squatting over the toilet is a bad thing.
I learned that in this book too.
Who knew? I was like, I'm strengthening my glutes. This is
Yeah.
good. And I'm not getting
Squatting.
diseases from the toilet seat. She's like, no, you cannot do that.
That was mine.
What? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we need an alternative of some sort. Like, so we're going to
Yeah.
get sick either way. You either sit on the seat and you get,
Win some, you lose some.
that was my,
Yeah, squatting. Great example. Yeah. Also debunked for me in this book. And they did not teach me that in grad school. That was not a class, but I wish somebody had told me. And I'm gonna have to tell my mom because I think it was my mom actually that told me to do that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to tell her.
okay.
Was there anything
They're
else?
quiet. They're maybe not from the book, but something you learned growing up about periods, about sex.
Yeah,
I think they need more alcohol before they're.
we start talking about that. Okay, listen, I'm on board with y'all. I get it.
Like it would make it harder to get pregnant.
That birth control affects your fertility and who you are, just like changes your personality. That birth control would change who you were attracted to. Interesting. Because it's a hormone, maybe, so it's gonna but impact your fertility is something they talked about in the book too, and that also debunked. Has no effect, at least. It's hard to say because you're like, oh, we don't research anything, but I mean, it seems like, yeah, that's all like another old. I call them old wives' tales. I don't know because it seems like it's an oral history passed down from women, and typically your mom who's honestly giving you the best advice she can, right, with what she's got, which is
limited.
little.
Right. Unless she read Our Bodies Ourselves.
Yeah.
But the birth
She did
control
not.
thing is interesting because I'm all about the slippery slopes, obviously, and the muddied water and stuff. Because, of course, the history of the birth control pill is hugely problematic. And the birth control pill that, the women in the 50s before, so it's approved by the FDA in June 1960. But in the 50s, they're testing it in Puerto Rico. And the dosage, the estrogen is 10 times what it is now. It was incredible. It had the potential to be very, cause strokes, sometimes heart attacks, deaths, no side effects, discuss. Does anybody know when you pick up a prescription and you get that, you open up this tiny little piece of paper and you're like, oh my God, what is this? It's called the patient package. It's the patient package insert. But does anybody know why we have those? It's from the pill hearings. So, yeah, Gaylord Nelson, the pill hearings in 1960, trying to determine whether or not the birth control pill is actually safe. And this was all because Barbara Seaman published this book called The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, that women are dying from the pill. So a lot of feminists were anti-pill. They hold these hearings. The only people they invite to testify are men, are doctors and researchers. Not a single woman who has actually taken the pill is a witness or provides testimony. And so there's a huge, the DC Women's Liberation Group holds a massive rally, and they break in and they're saying, you're using us as guinea pigs. Anyway, long story short, as a result of determining that, in fact, a lot of these women had terrible side effects, the decision was to include a patient package insert that now is in every. So one of the things that's interesting about women's health is a lot of the things that happen in the 60s, 70s, early 80s that were specifically about women's health end up being translated to everyone. One is patient package insert. Another is this whole idea of patient advocacy, right? That the patient had a right to inform themselves, ask questions, go to the doctor. That was something that was embraced by the women's health movement and developed. Interestingly, the next group of people that kind of adopt that platform is the LGBT community around AIDS, of educating themselves, because recognizing that doctors aren't going to do it for you, and you're going to have to go out there and demand certain rights. Anyway, so it's interesting because the doctor-patient relationship was radically transformed or challenged as a result of the women's health movement in ways not just for women.
Yeah.
And this idea that you had a right to know the side effects of what you were taking is why you have patient package inserts, and that's from that. So at the next cocktail party, when you're looking for a little piece of trivia, and it's still March, so it's Women's History, you could say, did you know that the patient package? The problem is, of course, we don't read the patient package, but it's the symbolism. It's the fact that they decided that we should be able to be informed about what goes into, and that the testing should include the negatives, right? And that you should ask the patient, right? Because if the issue is just, did you get pregnant or not? Because you're taking the birth control pill, to not get pregnant, typically, not always.
Yeah.
And that's the only question. That's not related to, did you have a stroke or
Important.
Other things. So that was a long-winded response, but it's because even among feminists, they view this as problematic, but perhaps it did change and part of the reason the pill has evolved is because of that. Now it is a very different beast than it was in 1960 because, of the demand to make some changes, because women did die as a result of that.
She was on a podcast that I earlier, and one of the things that she heard that men complain or say, "Oh, she's not attracted to me anymore."
Wow, that is so interesting.
So interesting. So the attraction thing came from men saying, well, she's not attracted to me because she's on birth control. That's hilarious. That's the pre-incel movement. Yeah, give us the name, because that's fascinating. In a horrible way.
The twist was, for sexual liberation, the pill was like, oh, you can do whatever you want. But a lot of women were like, suddenly we're supposed to be sexually available, even if we're not interested, right? Because we don't have an excuse because we can't get pregnant. So therefore, again,
Interesting.
go.
Yeah. Wow, that's good context. I did not know that. Um, we're talking about the women's health movement of like the 60s and 70s, but I think we're entering a new women's health movement um, out of necessity a little bit. How do you see that happening now in the modern? Do you see parallels to what? Do you see parallels to history and what has already happened? Should we be pulling from the movements of the 60s and 70s?
I'm a historian, of course.
I know.
Of course.
I'm
We always
throwing
have
you
to see-
softballs, girl. Yeah.
No, everything. I mean, why study history if it doesn't have some relevance, right? Other
Yeah.
than it's entertaining. But of course,
Yeah.
right? We learn from what came before us. And I thought it was really interesting to realize that a lot. So if you look at what was happening kind of 1970, so Roe versus Wade passes in 73. Between 70 and 73, certain states, New York and California, pass it like it's
Yeah.
like it is now. It was a state by state thing. But there was a large movement in the early 70s, pre-Roe versus Wade, to teach women how to do cervical self-exams, which basically means mirror speculum, you see your own body parts, right? And it was often done collectively. These groups would get together and basically pull down their pants, spread their legs, flashlight, mirror, see their cervix. And, on the one hand, it was sort of like, oh, you should understand your body, you should see what it looks like. But it was also the entry point into a form of self-abortion that was done in California and kind of spreads. Anyway, that same exact procedure is being taught again.
Oh.
Like literally trying to teach people how to do it as a result of this. So there are like literally parallels between the early 70s, pre-Roe versus Wade, and today, and these movements of trying to teach women, understand their bodies, etc.
Yeah.
So, I think the other thing, as a historian that's like delved and has spent a lot of time looking at archival materials and letters and stuff, mimeographs, purple, like the little mimeograph machine. The kind of advocacy that was happening in the 70s and the passion in which these people believed in, like, if we just kind of get that information out there, the world will be a better place.
Yeah.
Because it's about access to information. And so we're gonna do our newsletters and our mimeographs, and we're gonna get the word out and get people involved, kind of like some social media today.
Yeah.
What's frustrating to see is a lot, if you go back and just read some of this material from the early 70s, it could be 2024. It's the same, it's almost like, they've been banging their head on the wall. They've heard for so long these ideas were out there, but they got lost almost because they were so successful.
Yeah.
Roe versus Wade passes. We get into the 80s, Reaganomics, whatever. We move on. A new generation kind of takes for granted that they have certain rights, and then the shock that they don't, and so now we're reinventing the wheel and going back to the stuff that people were like exploring in the early 70s.
Yeah.
So there's a frustration that in some ways we really haven't evolved that much, or we've done this dip and we're relearning stuff that was started 50 years ago, and we have to relearn it now because we took things for granted and it's been lost.
Yeah, I will give you the example of birth control and access to birth control. Did not think that was something that ever would have been on the table to have access to birth control taken away. And that is very real and very on the table in many states. And that's actually terrifying. Very terrifying. I could sit here and ask you a million questions for the next like a bajillion hours, however long you would give me, I would talk to you. But because you're just engaging and you're an incredible speaker, and I just love hearing your insights. But I do want to open this up to our group, and I want to open up if you have anything you want to ask our wonderful, illustrious, very well informed expert. And it could be related to the book; it doesn't have to be. But I mean, this book covered so much, and we could sit here and go chapter by chapter. I mean, there's so much that's in this book. But I want to open this up. If there's anything you all would like to talk about this topic, this book, our wonderful expert.
Most of the basic research in the United States is funded by the NIH.
Yes.
And what do you see as their priorities over women's health versus other know that they look at abroad? Are there any specific programs or anything that NIH is doing to find money specific to women's health?
So the question was, is the NIH doing anything to provide funding for specifically for women's health?
Do you mean since
In the last 2
January of
months, or-
2025 or before?
Well,
Yeah.
Let's go back.
Let's go in the before
I mean, how-
times.
How good is it today?
Yeah.
Well, you now grants are
How
getting.
good what's happening with TI and
Yeah.
Okay, well, because literally words, if you have a
Yeah.
gender in the title, you
Those
get
grants
red
are not getting
flag.
funded. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it wasn't good before either. I mean, I think if you look at exactly what she talks about in the book, just the lack of funding for basic things on endometriosis, on these, there's been a push, and I think there's been some movement because there have been activists and scholars and doctors who are drawing attention to the problem here, that so many, and she does a great job of explaining, doctors aren't trained to understand what endometriosis is. It's already mysterious to begin with, but then they don't know the procedures. The fact it takes, what is it, 7 years to get that diagnosis? Well, that's because it's not just because it's hard to diagnose. It's because doctors aren't being educated in these areas. So, I mean, my answer is pretty basically, it's bad, but now it's worse.
Well, and let's think about that. You talked about the siloing of medicine too. Is there a National Institutes of Women's Health? I'm fairly confident the answer is no. It would get
No.
parsed out into endocrinology. It would get parsed out into connective tissue disorders, or maybe GI. And whatever tissue, it's probably hard to get research funding. I mean, like a research funding special request, it'd have to be something that was maybe earmarked specifically
Well,
in
NIH has
appropriations.
a public list of key areas of research, right? And
Yeah.
it's also broken down, but there is definitely a center. for
Yeah.
women's health.
Yeah, it would have to
No.
be a funding initiative, which I don't think there are.
The pharmaceutical companies are, their drug development is
Yep.
So
Yep.
you really need to go back.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Funding that is main source of funding. for
Yeah.
basic research.
Yeah.
Look at that, I'm not their funding priority.
Yeah.
So one indication of things gone wrong is the fact that the National Women's Health Network, which was a lobbying group formed in 1975, who was incredibly good, and some of the founding members of that were the protesters at the pill hearings. That organization has just folded. The National Women's Health Network no longer exists, which is horrible to think about. But because among the various layers are lobbyists, right, who are demanding to get certain things on the table. That was the organization that was pushing for greater research, and they're gone. The Women's Health Initiative, which she talks about in the book, which had to switch. I mean, that everything kind of got dismantled in the 90s when they went from hormonal stuff being okay to not okay, and but yeah, it's frustrating. Absolutely. Thank you for the question.
As a historian, who's a person in the women's health movement that you think everybody should know about?
Ooh, what a good question. So it's, as a historian, who's a person in the women's health movement that everyone should know about? I mean, me. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Joke. I mean, there's. I mean, the first person that came to mind is Judy Norsigian, who was the one of the founders of the Boston Women's Health Book Collective that writes Our Bodies Ourselves, and she's still very active. And I think I use her as an example because she is selflessly, actively concerned in providing information in any way possible. So part of what that organization did was not just generate awareness about, and she was in the National Women's Health Network, but not just generating information to get bills passed, but to get these newsletters out all over the world, to generate a global conversation, because the US, previous to now, was a major provider of basic health information, so including women's health, even in a
Yeah.
smaller level. So they're sending information all over the world. People are writing back. All of their materials are at Harvard and the archives. And there's massive correspondence over decades of these women writing to activists all over Africa, the Middle East, Europe, trying to exchange ideas. What are you guys doing about this? So she's one of those people that was a driver, a changer in the 70s, but continues 50 years later to tirelessly kind of continue to get that message out. But there's so many. I mean, there are so many incredible activists that I think are worthy of attention. That's just one. Sure.
Giving us a little homework. Is there anything else? I want to give you guys the opportunity. It's
If
also
not, I can keep talking.
well, I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about your latest book. I do want to give you
No, I just we don't have to go there. I want to
No.
just have a conversation about stigma because we haven't.
Let-
She
let's-
talks a lot
yeah.
about that too. We haven't really covered that. This discomfort with language, but I think she does a great job of
Yeah.
talking about that. That if you are not feeling comfortable talking about your body parts, what does that translate into? Okay, is that just is that a morality issue? Is it being proper? Is it being private? Fine. But what is it when a culture kind of actively discourages you from proper terminology about your body parts?
Yeah.
So here's an example. 2012, a state representative, I'm forgetting her last name, Michelle Brown, I want to say. I'm on the second.
We're on the
I
second
think-
drink.
She is censored on the state floor for using the term vagina in a debate about an abortion bill. She's silenced, and so the next day, she says, "Well, what term?" She's silenced because she's told the term vagina is offensive, and so the next day, she and her fellow female congresswomen say the word about 100 times on the state capitol steps by reading the vagina monologue and pointing out this is again a political issue by telling someone that the term vagina is offensive. And she says, what other term am I supposed to use, right? And what does that translate to? So we may think, okay, whatever, it's like abortion, you can agree to disagree, everyone has their opinions. But what does that translate to when a whole generation of women are basically told that they shouldn't talk about their body parts and they should feel ashamed about them because they are not supposed to have the language to talk about them? What does that translate to? A couple of things. One, surveys showed, okay, I have in front of here, A study in 2014 showed that a majority of women in the UK between the ages of 16 and 25 have a problem using the term vagina or vulva. And this leads to a basic misunderstanding of anatomical knowledge. Only half can then identify on a chart basic things about what their body parts are. So it starts with like, oh, I don't want to talk about it because it's inappropriate. That leads to, I don't actually know what's going on down there. That often leads to avoiding going to the gynecologist. Because if I can't talk about it because I know it's bad, why am I going to go see someone about it? And those lead to deaths, right? Because cervical cancer, they don't get pap smears, they don't talk about it. So you can talk about it as a moral issue, but it's a public health issue the minute you're not allowing people to understand their own body parts. So that's where it really gets problematic. To tell people they can't, it's not appropriate to talk about it equals they don't understand it. The other thing that happens is it leads to sexual abuse. Because young, particularly, and I've read a whole chapter on the Larry Nassar case. One of the reasons, so if you don't know who Larry Nassar is, right, he was the doctor for the U.S. women's girls gymnastics team and sexually molested hundreds of girls. And it went on for decades because none of them had the vocabulary to talk about it. And because he was a doctor, they didn't understand that what he was doing was wrong. There's two sisters that were both abused by Nassar. They didn't know that the other one had been abused. That's how strong that code of silence was. And for young women, their inability to understand it was abuse because they hadn't been given the vocabulary to understand what was going on. That's when it becomes a really serious issue. The problem is it's not just Larry Nassar. If you're like me and you start paying attention to the news, there's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people abused by gynecologists in the last couple of years, right? George Tyndall at USC, there's a long list. I don't need to go into it. The point is, silencing directly results in abuse. And that's where it's so important that we stop talking about this as if it's improper, because that directly leads to abuse. We have to have conversations about it. We have to enable young people to understand it, because if they don't understand it, they don't even know that the abuse is taking place. And then if they do, they don't know what to do about it because they haven't been given, because they're not listened to, right? Even when the gymnastics girls spoke up, the FBI, everybody ignored them because, again, it's a women's issue. But until, you start with the language and then you move up from there. Okay, end of speech. That's my big thing. And she does a good job of talking about stigma in this book. And why shouldn't we have access to basic information? Well, really, what's so threatening about understanding, what goes on down there? You have to kind of think something political is going on if you're told you're not supposed to understand what is happening.
Well, and we see that with, sex and health education. I mean, I think for a lot of people, the first time you might get introduced to that, if you're not getting introduced to that at home, is in schools. And a lot of that is focused around pregnancy and STDs, STIs. But that's also a health education course. And I think for a lot of people, that might be your only exposure to education about your body. And if you're not given that, if it is politicized, in many states is politicized, and you might not get a very comprehensive or even accurate education. And if that's all you got, you're lacking the language, and you're lacking the agency to take charge of your own health. And you are just sent off into the world with maybe no resources to understand that. And that's scary that is happening to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of women who are sent off with nothing because they live in a state with a government that believes it's dirty to say the word vagina. So instead, we're not going to talk to you about your anatomy. We're not going to talk about the vagina and the vulva. we're just gonna say don't have sex and you'll be okay.
Right.
Hey, don't have sex and you'll make it. Okay, what happens when I go through menopause? What is that? What should I expect? What changes are gonna happen to my body?
It doesn't matter.
Wait. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just don't have sex and don't get pregnant.
Yeah.
What?
If you're ever teaching a large class of college students, and you're lacking and they're all kind of get quiet, say, so what was sex education like in your high school? And you could walk away and an hour later they would still be talking. Because they all have something to say, whether it was, usually it's not positive, but everybody, because they're pissed off. Right now they're in college, they get it more. And it's a very entertaining extra. I highly recommend it. At your next dinner party, ask younger people about sex education, and then you can tell them about the patient package insert.
Yeah.
Right? And you're all good. But it's fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
people have a lot to say about whatever happened with sex education. I mean, it's a fascinating topic.
Oh yeah.
And it's such an puberty is such an uncomfortable age.
Oh.
But even in Purdue, where you have a lot of Indiana students, but I also have students from all over the world, and everybody has a different
Wow.
story, but nobody lacks an opinion about. Everybody has a story. It's fascinating. I love it. I don't even have to teach anymore. I just ask the question and they're off, right?
Oh my gosh.
And then I just have to cut them off after 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And they all feel it, because it's a form of consciousness raising. When you guys were talking, we were doing our job and we were talking too, and about kind of how do you learn about stuff and how do you talk about it. And you were saying, today it's Zoom groups or social media. That's how you, but that is really, talk about history. In the 1970s, it was consciousness raising groups. And it was the same mentality that, you all had your story, but you carried it that it was just something you went through, whether it was a rape or an abortion or a bad marriage or bad period or, whatever. And then within these women's liberation groups, they would sit around in a circle and everybody would answer a question like, what was it like growing up in your household? Was your brother treated differently than you or whatever? And that would lead to this recognition that, hold on a minute, you had that happen to you. Well, I had something similar. Well, you had it too? Okay, wait a second. I thought this was my problem, but maybe this is a systemic problem. And if we talk about it more, we can figure out strategy to why did we all, I thought it was just me. So it was kind of created the foreground for the Me Too movement, all of this stuff going on. Storytelling is so important because by feeling safe enough, and often it had to be in these women's only groups because you wouldn't say this in front of someone else. Now I think it's perhaps less so, but feeling like your story is valid and matters and should be part of the conversation has really become an effective mechanism for creating change, because the minute you feel empowered enough to tell it and you start making those connections, that's when you can say, oh, okay, it's not just me. There is a problem. What are we going to do about this problem? Right? And if it's about reproductive health, I've spent enough time in a classroom talking to young women who get pissed off, and they come out of that class like, right, we got to do something about this. So I think it's really important to create so there's the stigma. Well, how do you get over that? How do you create organizations or safe spaces or anything to kind of make people feel safe enough to speak up and to share their story? And that's where you start seeing the change. Whew, I've just solved all our problems.
Guys, it's a wrap. We solved it. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your insight and your experiences with us. I know we all appreciate it. And where can we find you outside of books?
I mean, I think I'm just going to hang out here because I really like it here.
Well, I know you have a website. If we want to learn more
Website,
about
my name,
your comings and goings.
WendyKlein.com.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you again for your time. I hope you all consider joining us next month we're going to read Our Moon. So we're going to go look up at the stars, and we're going to read. If you are missing the eclipse, we're going back to the moon. It's okay. We're going to relive our eclipse days. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you everybody for all of your support. And like I said, hope you join us again next month. And otherwise, stay safe travels, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Now you can go for drink 3.
Maybe I should eat something.
Yeah, you should go eat. Go